All right. So the therapeutic process, this is an approach that I have created over my years of delivering private yoga therapy that began with Desik in February 2002, no, January, telling me to start teaching. And he told me to start having private clients. So I came home that summer after my first 6 months of training, which was very little. I was doing mainly group classes, but I did have a few clients at that time. And this process has developed over those years. So in the process that I've created, and fortunately this follows IAYT standards that have developed also for the process of being a yoga therapist privately. I start with an intake process, which includes many forms, a self-assessment, which you've all gone through, 3 appointments, which I'm going to talk about more, and follow-up sessions. So that's how I structure my my practice, my private practice. And so, of course, during the intake process, this is pre-appointments, all these various things are happening. In many cases, clients are referred or it's word of mouth. In some cases, they find me on my website, but mainly it's referrals from other healthcare practitioners, other yoga teachers. For example, Bernie Clark, he always sends me a lot of people. Neil has sent me people. Or students that I teach in group classes who decide they want to work with me privately, and that would probably be about 50% of my students who take group classes also work with me privately. So that's, I would say, the bulk of my practice is that. If I don't know the student, if they're new, there's a lot of emails and phone calls, text messages, and then finally the first appointment is made. And at that point, I send them my intake waiver form, which you've all done before, my self-assessment, which you've all done before. I ask them to pay up front because I don't want to be dealing with that. In some cases, the person doesn't want to, and I just adjust, but I do request that. And then follow-ups thereupon, I charge $100 plus tax. So a general rate for a practitioner would be around $100 an hour. I give a little bit more just because that's what works for me at this point. At this time, when I started, I needed 2 hours to do what I do. I've gotten it down to 1.5 hours, and I'm hoping at some point I can get it down to 1 hour. That's my goal, but I don't charge my students for my slowness, my manda of my kapha. So you guys will have to figure that out for yourselves, but that's what felt right to me. The first appointment, which you're going to be working with Danielle a lot on, we touched on it in term 1 as well when we talked about therapeutic skills, and certainly did a lot of work on that with Reagh from a Vedic perspective in term 2, forming the therapeutic alliance. So that was something Desik really stressed, and it's in the literature now. We know that about 70 or 80% of the result that you get from any therapeutic intervention is from this therapeutic relationship or alliance that's formed. So the really key, it kind of makes or breaks me. I have examples where I was just off that day, and it just, sometimes I'm able to save it the second session, but I find this is quite vulnerable throughout the 3 sessions. I recently had an example where I was just totally on and great in all the sessions. In the last session, I didn't offer him the tea that I always asked him for and made for him very carefully. It was someone with Parkinson's, and he really loved that. And I was just not quite as gracious that last session, and he hasn't been back. Now that might be because of work situation, money situation, I don't know, but it left me questioning. So it's a really important piece. I can't stress it more. So So that first session before I meet with the person, I review the self-assessment, and if they've been kind enough to send it to me as a Word document, it saves me so much time, I will copy and paste things into a summary form that I've shared with you, and I'll draw your attention to after this presentation. And then I meet with the person and I review my notes and discuss this further and take further notes. And I haven't found it to be a problem for me looking down and typing and looking up. And as long as I'm looking up enough, I think people are used to that process. You'll have to decide that for yourselves. The process already takes much more time than really you're being paid for. So I do it all in session if I can, because, you know, I have to do a little bit before and a little bit after, but I feel I shouldn't be doing much more than 2 hours of work for one session that you're making $100 for. You know, 50 an hour, that's about a minimum that I'm willing to work for. So you'll have to work that out for yourselves, but those are some of the practicalities that one has to think about. So I designed the first practice, and the first session for me at this point is an hour and a half. When I started, they were 2 hours. My second appointment, I always try to book the second appointment within a week of the first one if I can. I didn't mention that here, but that is what I do. And of course, there's a check-in. I've already designed the first part of the practice, and I just see if I'm on the right track with that. It gives me information. If it didn't work, I have to change gears. Usually it does, fortunately, and that helps to build that trust, that Shraddha, as it's called in Sanskrit, from the Yoga Sutras, chapter 123, I believe. Shraddha, Viryam, Smriti, Samadhi, Pragya, Purvaka, Itaresham. So when we have that faith, Shraddha, we get energy, Viryam, and then from that Smriti, we remember our goal, we keep going, we're motivated to move forward, and that builds self-mastery, healing in the end. Okay, so second appointment, continuing to work on building that Shraddha. And completing the design of the practice. So it takes me 2 sessions usually to design a practice. In some cases, it takes me 1. So I had one with one of Alyssa's students the other day, Sheila or Shelley, I'm forgetting. I've had 2 students, I think it's Shelley, yes. She's going to be one of your last case studies with rheumatoid arthritis. What a delightful woman. Thank you, Alyssa. Anyway, it only took 1 session to build a strong first practice, and I left it at that. It just felt complete. So that's very unusual. If that happens, then, you know, the follow-ups would be paced. I'll talk about that in a minute, how I work with the follow-ups. Third appointment, checking in, solidifying the therapeutic alliance so that the person is motivated to practice. Most importantly, it has nothing to do with us, it has to do with their healing, because we know this therapeutic alliance really helps with healing. We review and refine the practice. It's mainly a run through at this point. I often videotape the practice for the person on their phone if they want me to. I give cues while they do it, and I videotape it, and they can have a full experience of the practice with me there. This usually takes less time. It usually takes an hour, but in some cases, if the person likes to talk, I know the KYM mentioned this when we visited them, you need more time. So probably the extra time for me is, a lot of that is helping skills, counseling skills, the kinds of things that I wish I had had the training that you're having with Danielle on before I got started. I had to go back to school to UBC to get them and study counseling skills that way. Okay, follow-up appointments. So the follow-up appointments, you check in, see how things are going, you catch up, you review and refine your goals. You review, refine, or revise the practice, or you design an additional or new practice. So, you know, some students will have several practices that they will do on different days of the week, and that's fine. I myself have 2 practices, and I've divided them up so that they take me a week to do because of wanting to do other things than just asana every day. So, you know, there's many models in how that all works. In terms of how often you see the person, I do have some students that I see about once every 2 months, but normally it's 3 to 6 months, and in some cases a year plus, or even, yeah, a year plus. So it depends on the person. I do reach out to students that I haven't seen in a while, usually once a year, just to see how they're doing and see whether, whether they want a follow-up. So I don't do that very often, just about once a year. And that's the end of my presentation. So, are there any questions about that so far? I invite you to ask me any questions. No, we're good. So yeah, that's basically the process that I've built, and that's what I'm going to be asking you to follow. Follow. Normally, I get you to do this during your internship to follow this exact procedure. And I say that, and then I remember that, yeah, that's probably not going to work very well because some of you have other processes that you do during your practicum, and the internship is now rolled into the practicum. So I would invite you to consider using this process, and I'll leave it at that. Okay, normally I actually get you to do this for the internship, but I'm going to let that go. So we'll see what you think from the videos you view and from, you know, what I get from conducting my sessions this way. I often get asked, I didn't mention this, why I ask for a 3 appointment commitment. The reason I do that is it's so much work to take on a new client. In some cases, it only takes me 30 minutes to prep. And in some cases, the person doesn't send me their self-assessment in time, and I just have to do it, you know, live, and you'll see some of those cases. And I'm at the point now where I feel like I barely need the self-assessment, but it is nice for me still. I do feel more warmed up. We know cognitively, you know, it's like schema activating to be able to kind of bring your knowledge to the surface. When you're new, I think anyway, it depends on you, but when I was new, I should say, I needed to do a ton of prep because in some cases I needed to go to my teachers and seek advice when I couldn't find notes on it. So I would go through my notes and try to find, you know, how do I deal with this? And then if I couldn't, we hadn't talked about a case like that, I go to Reagh. And I still do that. About once a year, I'll have a case that's outside something I've done and I'll need to seek advice. Okay, so that's going to depend on you. So you're all at different stages of your learning and your experience level, so that's going to just depend on you. Anyway, I'm a person who likes to prep a lot.
Have you seen the benefits or any differences between offering 3 package classes versus 5?
I've never done 5, Curie, so 5 would be I do 3 because I'm able to design a practice in 2, and I want 1 follow-up to be able to see how it's landed. So I didn't say that. The 3rd session, I usually schedule it about a month or 6 weeks. Krishnamacharya said 6 weeks for a practice to see whether it works. So I often try to follow that. Physiotherapists say about the same, about 6 weeks for something to, you know, kind of land. So I often give it about that to see how the practice is working. And I tell the person they can text or email me or call me at any time if they have little questions about their practice, and I don't charge for Okay, so it's just it's very practical. I know I'm very Vata deranged and unfocused at times, but I probably have learned to counter my learning disability by being extremely organized and structured in how I do things, because it helps me just, yeah, get done what I need to get done. Any other questions before I let you run off to Moodle? Okay, I'm just going to bring up my plan so I remember what I'm doing next. Oh yeah, I know what I'm doing next actually. So I'm going to share for you a couple of things. These are on Moodle in the file for today. So I'm going to give you some more time to look at these in more depth in a minute. I'm just going to say a little bit before I do that. So let's see, I'll bring this one up first. I'm going to bring up first my one called SXRX follow-up template summary. This is the one I actually use right now for every single client. And then I'm going to show you the detailed one that I developed for you, which is more what I had to do earlier in my career. Yes, this one, share. Okay, so this is what it took me many years to develop this, but and I'm going to show you some an earlier version of this that was just very difficult. This is much easier. So I just found over time, you know, from the self-assessment, which is very detailed, dealing with all the Mayas and etc., it was just easier for me to plop things into a template like this. So in the overview, I just have, you know, the name, profession, lifestyle type things, and then the symptoms in the self-assessment, they're going to tell me the symptoms, in some case root causes. I plot that in, and when I meet with the person, this list gets refined and it gets longer. And then this is something that Neil helped me with. He looked at various versions of this along the years. Neil and I have been working together for 10, 11 years now. He really encouraged me to think about SOAP notes, subjective, objective, assess, plan. And I'll show you the first version of that, which I did use earlier in my career 15 years ago. But at this point, anything I observe on any level, on any Maya of the 5 Maya levels, I plop into here. And I've been getting better at doing this. This has been the hardest. This is kind of my edge of learning. I felt like during this process, I actually got better at doing this boot camp of privates that I've just done for the last 6-8 weeks. And then I go into what am I doing today and what is my Hanam Upayam. So the Hetu, Hayam Hetu is the first part here, and the Hanam Upayam is here. I put the date of the session today, and I put my goals, and then I make a summary of that in kind of sutra form on my stick people, and you'll see that when we look at our cases. And that I do for me as well as my client. It just helps me keep focused and not having to look at multiple documents. Once I move to the paper document, I'm on the paper document, and I don't have to keep going back and forth to my online document unless the person brings up something that I really want to record. And then my follow-ups, I keep going. So for every case that I do, you are going to see one of these filled out in my case documentation for each client. Okay, so you'll see that done. So I just wanted to introduce that to you. That's what I really use in my real life. Okay, I'm going to show you my next one, and these are all ideas. And yeah, during your practicum / internship, you can develop this as you want, as it works for you. There's many ways to do this. Okay, so I'm going to show you this now. This was something that, yeah, when Neil saw my latest version, which was very, very pared down, he was like, yeah, I think we need to draw their attention to the Mayas a bit more, and I tended to agree with them. So I created this. This is a document only that's been in existence for a year, and this is for you guys. So, yeah, that's the right one. Okay, so in this one, it's the same thing, but there's just a little bit more guidance telling you about the process that I just explained verbally. And about the SOAP note idea, subjective, objective, assess, plan. So, and just a reminder to look at all the Mayas. So when you actually work with a person, it's quite difficult to scramble and like make notes on this Maya and that Maya. But if you want to, at this point in your career, you might want to, after you do your assessment and you've just written down madly whatever you could, you might want to organize it this way to just make sure that you are looking at all of those aspects of the person. And so that's, you know, this is, I'm saying from the self-assessment, and this will be refined when you talk to the person. So this would be a refinement of this. And this would also include objective observations, things that you learn through your discussion with the person. And I'll show you this next, which is what I used early in my career and about 5 years ago showed to Neil, and he helped me refine it further, and I'll show that to you soon. It's just a guide for you in terms of questions to ask to get this kind of information. Because Neil's first response is like, well, you know, your students don't have all the experience you have, so I think you need to spell it out a bit more. And I was like, yeah, good feedback. The darshanam, this is observing more carefully. This is objective. When it often moves into some questions, so it moves back into discussion, so there's kind of a back and forth, and this is kind of a mix between subjective and objective. The palpitation you saw in India, you're not going to be able to see me do that this term, but you did see me do some of it, I hope, during the group classes that I did last summer. So always very light touch, very, very, very light. And often looking at alignment issues, I'm often looking at, you know, I often put someone into spinal stretch position with their arms on a wall or back of the chair. And I'm feeling the back often and feeling for differences in height. One side is a little higher than the other. One has, you know, some lumpiness. There's a dip in the lower back. You'll see me do a lot of observation doing it through Zoom, and I was actually surprised how much I was able to see through just my eyes and not by touching. So it's been eye-opening, no pun intended. The pulse reading, for years I was terrified to do this, even though I had in-depth training for my Ayurveda master on this. But I just felt it was somehow out of my scope. So it took me a long time as a yoga therapist. It took me a long time to kind of develop this approach. And I have discussed this with Sridhar, and he thinks it's a good, you know, a good model to make it more of a yoga therapy application. So I'm going to let you read that later and think about it. You might have some questions tomorrow. And then you see, excuse me, something similar that you saw in my, excuse me, original template. So I'm going to stop this share. And there's one more that I'm going to share with you. If you have any questions at this point, I invite you to ask. Crystal clear? Okay. All right, so I'm going to close that one. And then there's just one more I want to show you, which is even more detailed. So this is what I used to use. And and I wouldn't recommend using it in session anymore because it was a bit cumbersome, but it's got some great elements for you to think about and to give you some ideas. So I like the cat. I always love seeing cats and dogs in my sessions. Okay, so this is the self-assessment is really a shorter version of this. So what I used to do when I first developed that self-assessment, which has gone through a lot of different aspects, is I used to fill out this form, and Neil helped me develop the objective pieces. I came up with some ideas, and then he helped me kind of differentiate between the subjective and objective pieces. So I'm going to have you read these later, but these are the kinds of questions that I ask, and some of them are a lot of them are in the self-assessment. So that's also helpful. But then there's some observed things that just a reminder to look for. And again, those are things that Neil in particular helped me with when I was trying to refine this 6 years ago. So I'll let you look at this later. It goes through all the Mayas, and it just has a bit more guidance. Okay? But what I have found is filling this out as my form for the student is cumbersome, because when someone shares knowledge with you or information, when they share, they're just all over the place. They're not like Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. Like, they don't do that. It's just like, you know, it's Annamaya and then Anandamaya and then Vijnanamaya, and then it's not like it's all over the place. So I just found in a holistic way, it was just way too cumbersome, and I was spending too much time trying to like navigate my form when I was making my notes. So it just worked much better for me to just sit and type, and most of what they're telling me came under symptoms, and then later some of it I move into, you know, lifestyle. Like I have those 2 sections now, you know, I'll do that post session. But I basically have 2 kind of things, like lifestyle, who you are, stage of life, all that kind of stuff. Section 1, the overview. Section 2, what are your symptoms? And then from that, with the person in a collaborative way, we come up with the goals. And you'll see that in my sessions. I'm extremely collaborative in my approach. I do not believe in a hierarchical system, as you might know, to my benefit and also fault. I'm a teacher who kind of sees myself with my students and not above them. So fortunately in yoga therapy, that approach seems to work for me quite well. So people feel part of what's happening. They don't feel that this is being imposed by the guru. I don't take that stance, and I never will. Anyway, any questions about all of that? And if you don't, I'm going to invite you to go to Moodle and look at these documents in more detail. And let me just have a look at time. So where are we at? We should be okay. All right, so 15 minutes. Yeah, so just take 15 minutes from now. Let's see. Yeah, that should work. Okay, so you can turn off your screens if you like and go to Moodle, go to today's file. This is our asynchronous piece. See you in 15. I'll call you back when the time comes. Have fun. If you have any questions, I'll be here in a relative way.